A mountain man watches a poor woman feed his son, and it changes her life forever. Out in the snowy highlands, a hardened father keeps his distance until a stranger steps into his cabin and warms a boy's heart with nothing but scraps of food and kindness. But kindness on the frontier is never simple. Whispers in town brand her as shameful. A banker with railroad ties demands she surrender a deed worth more than gold. And when fire strikes in the dead of night, the family's very survival hangs by a thread. As trust collides with betrayal and mercy stands against greed, can a poor widow's love heal a broken family, or will the ruthless frontier tear them apart? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered Colorado highlands as Daniel Boone trudged home from checking his wood traps. His boots crunched through the crusty snow, each step heavy with weariness. The bitter wind cut through his wool coat, but something else caught his attention, a thin wisp of smoke curling up from his woodshed. His heart quickened. He'd left Micah alone, as he often had to these past months since the accident. The boy could barely move in that makeshift wheelchair, let alone tend a fire. Daniel's pace quickened, one hand moving to the rifle slung across his back dot as he drew closer. Savory smells drifted through the crisp air. Cornbread and something else he couldn't quite place. His stomach growled, reminding him they'd been living on dried meat and hard biscuits for too long. He crept toward the woodshed door, listening intently. Inside, he heard soft murmuring and his breath caught Micah's quiet laugh. That sound, so long absent, almost made his knees buckle. Carefully, Daniel eased the door open just enough to peer inside. A woman he'd never seen before knelt by the crude hearth he'd built years ago. Her dress was threadbare but clean, her dark hair pulled back neatly despite signs of travel. She stirred something in his old iron pot while speaking softly to Micah, who sat wrapped in a quilt in his wheelchair. Just a little more. "Dear," she was saying, lifting a spoon to Micah's mouth. "There's plenty of warmth in even the smallest bite." Daniel watched, frozen in place as his son eagerly accepted the offering. Micah's thin face glowed in the firelight, animation returning to features that had grown too solemn these past months. "It tastes like Mama's," Micah said softly, and Daniel's chest tightened. The woman, she couldn't be much past 30, smiled gently. Food made with love often does. "Sweetheart." She smoothed Micah's unruly hair with a tender gesture that made Daniel's throat constrict. He must have made some sound then, for she turned sharply, rising to her feet. "Sir," she said, lifting her chin though her hands trembled slightly. "I'm Emily Hollis. I found your boy alone and cold. I hope you'll forgive the liberty, but I had some cornmeal in my pack, and he looked so hungry." Daniel stepped fully into the shed, taking in the scene. The fire was carefully banked, soup bubbling in his pot, and a small loaf of golden cornbread cooling on a flat stone. Most striking was Micah's face, bright, alert, and wearing the first real smile Daniel had seen since the accident. "Papa," Micah called out. "Miss Emily made Mama's cornbread." "Well, almost like Mama's, and soup from the dried beans you had stored. She says even little things can make a feast if you know how." Daniel removed his hat, buying time to steady his voice. "That so?" He looked at Emily Hollis more carefully now. Despite her worn clothing, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her eyes met his directly, showing neither shame nor defiance, just honest concern for his child. "I was passing through," she explained, "heading to my cousin's place near Denver. When I saw smoke from your chimney, I thought to ask directions. But finding the boy alone," she gestured to the wheelchair, "I couldn't just leave him without a proper meal. I used only scraps, sir, what I found in your stores." "If I've overstepped, Papa," Micah interrupted, "can Miss Emily stay for supper? She tells the best stories, about cities back east and ships on the ocean. His eyes shone with an enthusiasm Daniel hadn't seen in far too long. Daniel hung his rifle on its peg with deliberate care. The woman was a stranger, yes, but something in her manner spoke of honest intentions. And Micah's smile. Lord, how long had it been since he'd seen that? Reckon we can't let good cornbread go to waste, he said gruffly, pulling up an old crate to sit on. Much obliged for looking after my boy, ma'am. Emily's shoulders relaxed slightly, though her movements remained careful as she served up 3 bowls of soup. The rich smell of beans and herbs filled the small space as twilight deepened outside. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by Micah's eager questions about Emily's travels. Daniel watched them, something long dormant stirring in his chest. The way she attended to Micah's needs without making him feel helpless. How she drew him out with gentle questions and genuine interest. It reminded him of Sarah, his late wife, who had that same gift for making people feel valued. As night settled over the highlands, bringing with it bitter cold, Daniel found himself torn between ingrained suspicion of strangers and gratitude for this unexpected kindness. He studied Emily's profile in the firelight as she helped Micah with another spoonful of soup, her movements natural and nurturing. His son's happiness was like a warm weight in his chest, thawing something he thought had frozen solid with grief. The morning sun streamed through the cabin's frost-etched windows, casting long shadows across the plank floor. Daniel stood at the wood stove, watching as Emily showed him how to properly mix biscuit dough. Her hands moved with practiced grace, adding just enough milk to the flour. The secret's in not working it too much, she explained, her voice soft. Like pie crust, gentle hands make it tender. From his wheelchair by the table, Micah watched with bright eyes. Miss Emily worked in a boarding house kitchen, he announced proudly. She knows all sorts of things about cooking. Daniel noticed how Emily's shoulders tensed slightly at the mention of the boarding house. She dusted flour from her hands, her movements becoming measured, careful. I did, for a time, she said, looking down at the dough. After my Thomas passed, that was my husband. I took work there. But when Jimmy, our little boy, took fever, she paused, swallowing hard. After we lost him, I couldn't keep up with the rent. The owner, she was kind as she could be, but business is business. Micah wheeled closer, his face full of concern. You lost your little boy? Emily nodded, managing a gentle smile despite the pain in her eyes. He would have been about your age now. 6 years old this past spring. Like me. Micah's face lit up. Did he like stories too? Oh, he loved them. Emily's voice grew warmer with the memory. He especially liked tales about trains. He'd watch them pass through town, counting the cars and waving to the engineers. Railroad folk, Daniel said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Thomas worked laying track, Emily acknowledged. Good, honest work. But when the accident took him, she squared her shoulders. Well, that's all past now. I'm headed to my cousin's place in Denver, though I haven't seen her since we were girls. Micah grinned. Papa says the train whistle sounds like a lonesome coyote. Don't you think it's more like singing? Emily laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to brighten the whole cabin. Why? I never thought of it that way. But you're right. It does sound like singing. Daniel watched his son beam at her approval, something tight loosening in his chest, even as worry gnawed at him. After breakfast, he hitched up the mule team to the wagon, knowing they needed supplies from town. Emily helped settle Micah on the wagon seat, tucking blankets around his legs against the morning chill. The ride into town was quiet except for Micah's occasional questions about Emily's travels. Daniel couldn't help noticing how naturally she steadied the boy when the wagon hit rough spots, how her stories kept him distracted from the discomfort of the jolting ride in town. The whispers started as soon as they pulled up to the mercantile. Women gathered in clusters, their heads bent together, eyes following Emily as she helped Micah down from the wagon. Daniel caught fragments of their talk. Homeless, railroad widow, probably looking for handouts. Inside the store, Mrs. Peterson, the ranch wife from up north, deliberately turned her back when Emily passed. "Railroad trash," she muttered to her companion, just loud enough to be heard. Daniel felt heat rise in his neck, his hands clenching at his sides. But Emily kept her head high, focusing on helping Micah examine the candy jars while Daniel gathered flour and other supplies. Her dignity in the face of their scorn only made his anger burn hotter, though he forced himself to stay silent. The ride home was subdued, though Micah chatted happily about the peppermint stick Emily had bought him with her last few coins. As evening approached, Daniel watched her prepare a simple but satisfying supper from their new supplies, her movement sufficient despite her obvious weariness. After Micah was settled for the night, Daniel found Emily on the cabin's small porch, staring at the stars. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "The woodshed loft is dry," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Got some clean straw up there, extra blankets. Reckon you could stay there a spell, till you get your footing." Emily turned to face him, starlight catching the sheen of tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Boone. I don't want to be a burden. I ain't a burden to have help with Micah," he cut in gruffly. "Boy needs—" He stopped, unsure how to continue. From inside, Micah's voice called out, "Miss Emily? Could you tell me just one more story?" Emily glanced at Daniel, who nodded slightly. As she turned to go inside, Micah's small hand reached out to grasp hers, his grip sure and trusting. Daniel watched them together, his heart torn between hope and fear, between the memory of his loss and the possibility of something new taking root in his home. The Sunday morning dawned with crystal clarity, the kind that made the mountain peaks seem close enough to touch. Daniel adjusted his collar, watching Emily help Micah with his Sunday shirt buttons. She wore Sarah's old shawl. Daniel had wordlessly left it on her bedroll that morning, its faded blue wool softening her worn dress. "Reckon folks'll settle once they see you at service," Daniel said gruffly, lifting Micah into the wagon. "Church-going folk can't gossip so fierce about their own." Emily smoothed Micah's hair, her smile gentle but uncertain. "I hope you're right, Mr. Boone." The little white church sat proud against the mountain backdrop, its fresh paint gleaming. Daniel wheeled Micah up the newly built ramp, noting how Emily kept her head high despite the sideways glances from arriving families. They settled into a back pew, where Micah could see without blocking others' view. When the hymns began, Micah's clear voice rose above the congregation, singing out Amazing Grace, with more spirit than Daniel had heard since the accident. Several older women turned to smile, their faces softening at the boy's enthusiasm. But others frowned, shooting disapproving looks at Emily, who sat close beside him. "The Lord sees our hearts," she whispered to Micah, squeezing his hand. "Sing as he made you to sing." After the service, while Emily helped Micah with his coat, Preacher Ward approached Daniel. His usual warm greeting was notably absent. "Brother Boone," the preacher said quietly, drawing Daniel aside. "A word, if you please." They stepped into the shadow of the church. "That woman," Ward began, his voice stern. "Taking in strays may seem charitable, but you must guard your reputation. People talk." Daniel's jaw tightened. Emily's been nothing but help with Micah. Boy's coming alive again. Nevertheless, Ward pressed, a single woman, living under your roof. It isn't proper. Before Daniel could respond, a well-dressed man approached Emily where she waited by the wagon. Daniel recognized him as Mr. Latham, the banker who'd lately been buying up local properties for the railroad. "Mrs. Hollis," Latham said smoothly, tipping his hat. "I've been hoping to speak with you. Your late husband filed a water claim last spring, rather valuable piece of creek access." Emily's spine straightened. Yes, yes. Thomas believed that water would be crucial for future settlements. Indeed, Latham's smile didn't reach his eyes. The railroad could offer you a fair price for those rights. Say, $50? That water claim was Thomas's dream, Emily replied, her voice steady despite her pallor. He paid twice that just to file the paperwork. Latham's expression hardened slightly. Dreams don't feed a woman alone in the world. Mrs. Hollis, best consider my offer carefully. He touched his hat brim again and strode away. The ride home was quiet, broken only by Micah's occasional humming of hymns. As soon as they arrived, Daniel stalked to the woodpile, grabbing his axe. The steady thunk of splitting wood echoed his frustration with the town's narrow minds and Latham's barely veiled threats. Emily emerged from the cabin, gathering split pieces into her apron. "Mr. Boone," she said softly, "I'm grateful for your kindness, but I don't want to cause trouble for you in town." Daniel drove the axe deep into a stump. "Ain't right," he muttered. Them judging without knowing. "Papa," Micah called from the doorway. "It's getting cold. Can't Miss Emily sleep inside tonight, please? The loft gets awful drafty." Daniel looked at his son's pleading face, then at Emily standing quietly with her armload of kindling. The memory of Sarah's voice seemed to whisper in his ear. Kindness ain't never wrong. "Daniel Boone," he sighed heavily. "Reckon we could clear a corner by the stove. More proper than the loft, anyway." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Thank you," she whispered, carrying the wood inside. Later, as Daniel arranged blankets for Emily's bedroll, Micah watched from his wheelchair, beaming. "Now Miss Emily won't be cold," he declared. "And maybe she'll stay forever." "Hush now," Daniel said, though his voice was gentle. "Time for sleep." But as he banked the fire for the night, watching Emily tuck Micah in with a soft song, Daniel couldn't help wondering if his son might be wiser than all the proper folk in town put together. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin's small window, casting warm squares on the rough-hewn floor. Emily sat with Micah at the kitchen table, a pile of soft pine blocks between them. Her gentle hands guided his smaller ones as she demonstrated how to hold the whittling knife safely. "Like this," she showed him, supporting the wood against her thumb. "Always cut away from yourself, nice and slow." The blade peeled away a thin curl of pine, releasing its sweet scent into the air. Micah's face scrunched in concentration as he mimicked her movements. His first attempts were clumsy, but Emily's patience never wavered. "That's it," she encouraged. Small strokes work best. Daniel paused in the doorway, watching. He'd been heading out to check the fence lines, but the sight of his son's intense focus held him still. Micah's hands, usually restless in his lap, moved with careful purpose. A small smile played at the boy's lips, the kind of natural joy Daniel hadn't seen since before the accident. "What are you aiming to make?" Daniel asked, stepping closer. Micah held up his block of wood proudly. "Miss Emily says we can make animals. She's showing me how to do a rabbit first, 'cause they're simple." Daniel nodded, studying the crude but earnest beginnings of the carving. "Reckon that's fine work for a start." He touched his son's shoulder briefly, then grabbed his rifle from its peg. "Got a ride fence today. Keep an eye for coyotes, been prowling lately." "We'll have supper waiting," Emily promised, already reaching for another piece of wood to demonstrate the next cut to Micah. They stretched long as Daniel rode the boundaries of his small ranch. Winter had driven the coyotes bold. He'd found 2 places where they'd tested the fences. He mended the weak spots, all the while turning over the banker's words from yesterday in his mind. Water rights were precious in these parts, often worth more than the land itself. The sun was setting when he finally turned toward home. The cabin's windows glowed with lamplight, and the smell of cooking drew him in like a beacon. Inside, rich stew bubbled in the iron pot, filling the air with the aroma of herbs he didn't remember having. Found some wild sage while gathering kindling. Emily explained, ladling generous portions into their bowls. And the last carrots from your root cellar needed using. Daniel took his first bite carefully. Flavor burst across his tongue, nothing like his own simple cooking. "This here's mighty fine," he said gruffly, surprising himself as much as Emily. She startled at the compliment, color rising in her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Boone," she murmured, turning quickly to help Micah with his spoon. The boy was already drooping in his chair, worn out from his day of learning new skills. Wooden shavings still clung to his shirt, and his first rough carving sat proudly by his plate. After supper, he fell asleep almost as soon as Emily tucked him in, his hands still curved as if holding the whittling knife dot in the quiet that followed. Daniel sat at the table, turning up the lamp's flame. Emily gathered near, her hands busy with mending but her expression distant. "That banker," Daniel said finally, keeping his voice low. "He spoke truth about them water rights?" Emily's needle paused mid-stitch. "Yes," she admitted softly. "Thomas, my husband, he filed claim last spring on the creek upstream. Said it would be valuable someday when more settlers came." She met Daniel's eyes steadily. "But I never trusted Mr. Latham. Thomas said he tried to pressure him too, before the fever took him." Daniel leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath him. He'd seen enough of the territory's water wars to know how ugly they could turn. Small ranchers driven out, mysterious accidents, night riders with torches. A woman alone made an easy target for such men. $50 was an insult, he said quietly. "That claim's worth 10 times that, maybe more." "I know." Emily's hands twisted in her lap. "But I can't sell." That claim was everything Thomas had left to give me, his dream of building something lasting. "I mean to honor that dream somehow." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding all too well about holding on to what remained of a lost spouse's hopes. He stood, checking his rifle's action out of long habit. The metal gleamed in the lamplight as he ran the cleaning rod through the barrel. Some threats wore bankers' suits, but others prowled on 4 legs. Best to be ready for both kinds. Emily watched him work, her needle moving steadily again. Neither spoke of what might come, but the weight of shared worry filled the cabin's silence. Outside, a coyote's distant call echoed off the mountains, hungry and alone in the gathering dark. The post office bell jingled as Daniel pushed through the door, shaking snow from his coat. He'd come to fetch a package of medicine for Micah's winter test, but the telegraph operator's rapid clicking drew his attention. Behind the counter, young Tommy Wilson's pencil scratched across paper, transcribing the incoming message. "Urgent acquisition required. Hollis Water Tract. Essential to northern expansion," Tommy muttered as he wrote. Daniel's shoulders tensed. He lingered by the notice board, pretending to read posted bills while straining to hear more. "That's for Mr. Latham right away." "Dumb," postmaster instructed Tommy. "Market priority." Daniel's jaw clenched. Without waiting for his package, he strode across the street to the bank. The fresh snow crunched under his boots as purpose drove him forward. Through the bank's front window, he could see Latham at his desk, examining papers through gold-rimmed spectacles. The banker's smile was oily when Daniel entered. "Mr. Boone, what brings you to town on such a bitter morning?" "Railroad's mighty interested in that water claim," Daniel said flatly. "Reckon that's why you've been pressing the widow so hard." Latham's smile didn't waver. "News travels fast in our little community." He leaned back, adjusting his silk vest. "Though I wonder why you've taken such personal interest in Mrs. Hollis's affairs. She's under my roof." "That makes it my business." "Ah, yes. Quite charitable of you." Latham's tone made the words sound dirty. "But surely you understand her position is untenable. No funds to develop the claim, no connections to defend it." He spread his hands. "The community knows what's best. Progress cannot be stopped by one stubborn woman. Seems to me the community, Might think different if they knew the whole truth, Daniel growled. Perhaps. Latham's eyes hardened, though his smile remained. But who would believe a squatter's word over a respected businessman? Best advise your guest to accept a reasonable offer while she can. Daniel's fists clenched, but he kept them at his sides. Starting a fight wouldn't help Emily's cause. Without another word, he turned and left, the door rattling in its frame behind him. Back at the cabin, Emily was helping Micah with his letters when Daniel burst in. Snow dusted his shoulders as he paced the small room, relating what he'd overheard. Emily's face grew pale, but her spine straightened. I won't be bullied into selling, she said firmly. Thomas believed that water would matter someday. He was right, and I mean to honor that. Before Daniel could respond, a knock interrupted them. Sarah Jenkins from the next farm overstood at the door with her husband Tom, bearing a basket of preserved peaches. Thought we pay a neighborly call, Sarah said, though her smile seemed forced. Been meaning to welcome our new friend. Emily thanked them gracefully, but tension filled the cabin as they settled around the table. Tom cleared his throat several times before speaking. Been some talk in town, he began carefully. About the railroad coming through. Brings opportunities, you know, for those willing to cooperate. Seems to me cooperation works best when it goes both ways, Daniel said evenly. Sarah laid a hand on Emily's arm. We're just concerned, dear. A woman alone. These matters can turn ugly. Might be easier to make a fresh start somewhere else. For everyone's peace of mind, Daniel's chair scraped back. Might be easier for folks to mind their own business. Now, Daniel, Tom started, but Daniel cut him off. Much obliged for the peaches. We won't keep you from your evening chores. After they left, Emily sank into her chair. I'm causing nothing but trouble for you, she whispered. Maybe they're right. Look here. Micah's excited voice broke through the heavy moment. He held up a small wooden cross, carefully whittled and sanded smooth. Made it today. Miss Emily showed me how to make the edges real neat. Daniel took the cross, turning it in his rough hands. The work was simple, but done with obvious care. His son's face shone with pride, something he hadn't seen since before the accident. That's fine work, son, he said softly. Real fine work. Outside, snow began falling harder, thick flakes swirling in the gathering dusk. Emily built up the fire while Daniel brought in extra wood. Micah continued practicing his whittling by lamplight, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls as they drew close together against the cold. Daniel watched Emily help Micah smooth rough edges from his carving, her hands gentle and patient. The sight stirred something protective in his chest. He knew the railroad's pressure would only grow worse, but looking at his son's peaceful face, he was certain of his choice. Whatever came, they would face it together. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cabin floor as Emily set down her mending. Daniel, I've been thinking about Micah's schooling. Daniel looked up from his coffee, brow furrowed. What about it? The schoolmarm, Miss Patterson, she welcomes all children, even those who need special arrangements. Emily's voice softened. Micah's so bright. He deserves a chance to learn properly. Daniel's weathered hands tightened around his cup. The thought of his son facing town gossip made his chest ache. But when he glanced at Micah, eagerly whittling by the window, he saw the same hunger for learning he'd noticed in the boy's eyes lately. Reckon we could try, he said finally. Just for today. The schoolhouse bell was ringing as Daniel guided their wagon down the rutted street. Emily sat beside him, straight-backed and dignified despite the stares. Micah bounced with excitement in his wheelchair. Secure between them, Miss Patterson met them at the schoolhouse door, her kind face creasing into a warm smile. Welcome, Micah. Emily told me you've been practicing your letters. Yes, ma'am. Micah beamed. Miss Emily's been teaching me to write my name." "That's wonderful." The schoolmarm turned to Emily. "You've done well with him. Some children need that extra encouragement to bloom." Daniel helped carry Micah's chair up the steps, his heart easing at the teacher's genuine welcome. But as he stepped back outside, he caught fragments of conversation from a group of ranch wives near the general store. Letting that woman stay on ruined his good name. What kind of example? Their words stung like winter wind. Daniel squared his shoulders and walked past, remembering Micah's bright face at the schoolhouse door. That evening, lamplight pooled golden across the cabin table as Micah carefully sounded out words from his new primer. Xiati, cat. Diogi, dog. His voice rang with triumph. "Well done." Emily clapped, and even Daniel couldn't help smiling at his son's progress. Later, as Emily stirred the stew pot, she spoke quietly. "Daniel, there might be a way to settle this water rights business." He looked up sharply. "How's that?" "Thomas, my husband, he was careful with documents. Before he died, he gave copies of our deed and survey maps to old Mr. Fletcher, the retired surveyor." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Mr. Fletcher moved up near Eagle Creek last spring, but he'd remember. He was like a father to Thomas." Daniel considered this as he helped her serve the stew. The surveyor's word would carry weight, maybe enough to counter Latham's schemes. "Eagle Creek's a day's ride," he said thoughtfully. "But if those papers exist, they do," Emily insisted. Thomas trusted Mr. Fletcher completely. After Micah was tucked in, Daniel cleaned his rifle by the fire. "I'll ride out tomorrow," he decided. "Best to settle this quick before the railroad men arrive." Emily nodded, relief and worry mixing in her expression. "I'll tend things here. The garden needs weeding, and Micah's clothes want mending." Her hands twisted in her skirt. "I won't be a burden while you're gone." Daniel recognized the fear behind her words. Fear of rejection, of being cast out again. "You're no burden," he said gruffly. "Never thought you were." Morning came crisp and clear. Daniel saddled his bay horse while Emily packed him bread and dried meat for the journey. She worked efficiently, determined to prove her worth, though her eyes betrayed her concern that his help might come at too high a cost. "Mind them chickens need feeding twice," Daniel instructed, checking his saddle straps. "And there's that loose board by the well needs fixing. I'll see to everything," Emily promised. "Just be careful." Daniel mounted up, adjusting his hat against the rising sun. The bay horse pranced, eager to move. Emily stood in the doorway, her hand raised in farewell, and Daniel felt a curious tightness in his chest at the picture she made, as if she belonged there, watching him ride out, waiting for his return. "Back by sunset tomorrow," he called, turning his horse toward Eagle Creek. They had a chance now, a real chance to prove Emily's claim and silence the gossips. As hoofbeats carried him away from the cabin, Daniel found himself already counting the miles home. The morning sun glinted off patches of early snow as Daniel guided his horse through the winding canyon trails. The air held winter's bite, sharp and clean against his face. His bay mare picked her way carefully over the frosted ground, hooves crunching through icy patches. Daniel's thoughts wandered back to the cabin, to Emily's quiet strength as she'd watched him ride out. The past weeks had changed things. He couldn't deny that anymore. Where once the cabin had felt hollow with grief, now it held warmth again. Micah's laughter, the smell of fresh bread, small comforts he'd nearly forgotten dot around midday. He spotted smoke rising from a modest cabin tucked against the canyon wall. Mr. Abernathy's place. The old surveyor was outside, splitting wood with slow, deliberate strokes. He straightened at Daniel's approach, leaning on his axe. "Well now, if it ain't Daniel Boone," Abernathy called out, his voice weathered but strong. "Been a spell since anyone's ridden out this way." Daniel dismounted, leading his horse closer. "Mr. Abernathy, Hope you don't mind the visit. Mind? Lord, no. Come in where it's warm. Got coffee on the stove. Inside, Daniel sat at the rough wooden table while Abernathy poured 2 steaming cups. The cabin smelled of tobacco and old paper. Maps lined the walls, their edges curling with age. What brings you up the canyon? Abernathy settled into his chair with a grunt. Emily Hollis, Daniel said directly. Widow woman. Says her husband Thomas had you survey their water claim few years back. Abernathy's eyes sharpened with recognition. Thomas Hollis? Good man. Died too young. He stood slowly, moving to a trunk in the corner. Railroad's gotten wind of that claim, I expect. You know about it then? Know about it? Abernathy chuckled, rifling through papers. I mapped every inch myself. Spring-fed creek, runs year-round. Valuable water rights, properly registered. He pulled out a leather folder, weathered but intact. Thomas knew what he was about. Had me make 2 copies of everything. Daniel's heart lifted. You'd testify to that. If needed? Son, I've surveyed this territory 30 years. Abernathy's voice carried quiet authority. My words still mean something, even if my legs ain't what they used to be. You tell a widow I'll stand for her claim any day. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Emily kept her hands busy to quiet her worrying. She kneaded bread dough with practiced motions, the familiar work soothing her nerves. Micah watched from his wheelchair, asking questions about the process. My mama taught me to bake, Emily told him, shaping the loaf with gentle pats. And I taught my little James, too. Her voice caught slightly at her son's name. You had a little boy? Micah asked softly. Emily nodded, managing a smile despite the ache in her chest. Yes, about your age. He loved helping in the kitchen. She worked the dough as she spoke, her voice trembling but steady. He'd get flour everywhere, but he was so proud when the bread came out golden brown. Later, while the bread baked, Emily settled in her chair with Micah's torn shirts. Her needle flashed in the afternoon light as she told more stories about James, his favorite games, the way he'd chase butterflies, how he'd sing himself to sleep at night. The memories hurt less somehow, shared with this bright-eyed boy who listened so intently. The sun was setting when hoofbeats announced Daniel's return. Emily's heart jumped at the sound. She'd been watching the trail since afternoon, though she tried not to show it. Daniel stamped snow from his boots at the door, his face reddened from the cold but bright with purpose. Found him, he announced. Abernathy remembers everything. Says he'll testify if needed. Emily's knees went weak with relief. She steadied herself against the table, eyes filling despite her best efforts. Thank God, she whispered. Now then, Daniel said gruffly, clearly uncomfortable with her tears. Something sure smells good in here. Emily wiped her eyes quickly, turning to dish up the stew she'd kept warm. They gathered around the table. Daniel, Emily, and Micah, steam rising from their bowls in the lamplight. Though the cabin was humble, with its rough-hewn walls and simple furnishings, something about the scene felt right. Like family, Micah chattered about his day between bites, proudly showing his father the mending Emily had taught him. Daniel listened, offering quiet words of praise that made the boy beam. Later, after Micah had drifted to sleep in his bed near the hearth, Emily worked quietly, banking the fire for the night. Daniel sat in his chair, whittling a small piece of wood. The silence between them felt comfortable, familiar. When Emily straightened from the fireplace, she caught Daniel watching her, his expression thoughtful in the golden light. Their eyes met briefly, no words needed, sharing a moment of profound gratitude. For this shelter, for hope restored, for the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. 3 days passed like molasses in winter. On the morning of the town meeting, frost painted delicate patterns across the cabin windows. Daniel hitched the team before dawn, his breath clouding in the cold air. The wooden wagon wheels creaked as he helped Emily settle Micah among the quilts, tucking the thick blankets around them both. The drive into town stretched long and quiet. Emily clutched the precious deed papers inside her shawl, close to her heart. Micah huddled between them, his eyes bright with excitement despite the chill. The boy had insisted on coming, declaring it was family business. Main Street stood empty in the early morning light, though smoke already curled from the mercantile's chimney. Daniel guided the wagon to a stop outside the meeting hall, a weathered building that doubled as the church on Sundays. He lifted Micah carefully from the wagon, setting him in his wheelchair while Emily gathered her skirts. Inside, oil lamps cast wavering shadows on the wooden walls. Townsfolk filled the hard benches, their whispers falling silent as Daniel wheeled Micah down the center aisle. Emily walked beside them, chin held high despite the stares. Mr. Latham sat near the front, immaculate in his black suit, a faint smile playing at his lips. Judge Peterson called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. "We're here to address the matter of water rights concerning the Hollis claim," he announced, his voice filling the drafty space. "Mrs. Hollis, please step forward." Emily rose slowly, smoothing her worn dress with trembling hands. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she made her way to the front. In the lamplight, her face showed both fear and determination. "Your Honor," she began, her voice soft but clear. "My late husband Thomas filed these water rights 3 years ago." She unfolded the papers carefully. The claim was properly surveyed and registered with the Territory Office. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. As she passed the documents to the judge, Mr. Latham leaned forward slightly, his keen eyes following every movement. "I have asked Mr. Abernathy, who conducted the original survey, to speak to the authenticity of these papers," Emily continued. The old surveyor stood with dignity, despite his stiff joints. "Indeed, Your Honor, I mapped that creek myself, every bend and branch." Thomas Hollis filed everything proper and legal. His weathered voice carried authority, earned through decades of respected work. "Those are my original markings on that deed." For one shining moment, hope filled Emily's heart. She glanced at Daniel, who sat straight-backed beside Micah, his expression carefully neutral. Some of the townspeople nodded thoughtfully, impressed by Abernathy's testimony. But then Mr. Latham rose, adjusting his silk vest with manicured hands. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "while I have nothing but respect for Mr. Abernathy's experience, surely such an important matter requires further verification." He smiled apologetically. "I simply suggest we await confirmation from the County Land Office. For everyone's peace of mind." Judge Peterson nodded slowly. "A reasonable request, given the circumstances." He gathered the papers carefully. "This meeting will adjourn until we receive official word from the county seat. Say, 2 weeks hence." Emily's shoulders slumped slightly, though she kept her head high as she returned to her seat. Daniel's hand found hers briefly, rough and warm, offering silent support. As they loaded back into the wagon, Micah's clear voice cut through their disappointment. "God's fighting for us, ain't he?" he asked, eyes shining with childlike certainty. "Just like David against Goliath." Emily smiled despite her worry, tucking the quilts around him. "You're right, dear heart. We must keep faith." The ride home felt lighter somehow, warmed by Micah's unwavering belief. The late afternoon sun painted the snow-dusted hills in shades of gold and rose. Daniel handled the reins with sure hands, stealing glances at his companions. That evening, after supper was cleared and Micah settled in bed, Daniel sat in his chair by the fire. Emily moved quietly around the cabin, setting things in order for the night. The lamplight caught in her hair as she bent to mend one of Micah's shirts. Something stirred in Daniel's chest, a warmth he'd thought long buried with his wife. He allowed himself, just for a moment, to imagine more evenings like this. Emily reading stories to Micah by lamplight, her gentle voice bringing the words alive. The sound of his son's laughter filling these walls again. The cabin transformed from a place of grief to one of joy. A faint smile touched his lips, though worry still gnawed at the edges of his mind. He knew Latham's kind, men who wielded power like a weapon, who saw the law as something to bend rather than respect. But for now, he held on to this moment of peace, this glimpse of what could be. 2 nights after the town meeting, Daniel jerked awake in his bed. Something was wrong. The air carried a sharp, acrid smell that made his throat tighten. Smoke. He bolted upright, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the cabin's frosted window, an orange glow painted the night sky. The barn was burning. Emily! Daniel shouted, yanking on his boots. Fire! He burst through the cabin door into the biting cold. Flames already engulfed half the barn's wooden frame, crackling and spitting sparks into the darkness. The heat slapped his face as he ran to the well, his mind racing. The horses, were they still inside? A terrified whinny answered his question. The animals were trapped. Daniel grabbed the well bucket and plunged it into the icy depths. But he knew it was futile. The fire was too big, too hungry. He needed more. His gaze swept to the deep snowbanks beside the cabin. Snow, it might help. He sprinted for the shovel propped against the cabin wall, scooping massive loads of snow and hurling them at the base of the flames. The heat melted each payload instantly, turning it to useless steam. Inside the cabin, Emily woke to thick smoke seeping through the walls. "Micah!" she cried, stumbling to his bed. The boy was already coughing, eyes wide with fear. "The barn's on fire," he choked out. Emily grabbed his wheelchair, lifting him into it with strength born of desperation. Smoke stung her eyes as she gripped the wooden handles, pushing toward the door. The chair's wheels caught on the uneven floorboards, forcing her to drag it the last few feet. "Daniel!" she screamed as they reached the threshold. He spun at her voice, saw them silhouetted in the doorway. The wind had shifted, driving smoke straight at the cabin. Without hesitation, he abandoned his futile firefighting and ran to them. Together, they pulled Micah's chair through the snow, away from the suffocating smoke. A thunderous crack split the night. The barn's roof beams gave way, collapsing inward in a shower of burning timber. Daniel watched helplessly as the wagon he'd spent years saving for vanished into the inferno. All their winter stores, grain, preserved food, hay for the animals, gone in minutes. The roar of hoofbeats announced the arrival of neighbors, drawn by the fire's glow. They reined their horses to a stop at a safe distance, faces illuminated by the flames. "Lord have mercy," someone muttered. "Ain't that a shame?" another added. But no one moved to help. Daniel stood rigid, his arm around Micah's shoulders as their neighbors watched the barn burn. He knew what they were thinking, that this was the price of harboring Emily, of defying the railroad's wishes. Emily knew it too. She hugged herself against the cold guilt, etching deep lines around her eyes as she watched their livelihood turn to ash. This was her fault. All of it. These good people had taken her in, shown her kindness, and she brought destruction to their door. The fire burned for hours, until nothing remained but smoldering timbers and the bitter smell of smoke. One by one, the neighbors drifted away, offering hollow words of sympathy, but no real assistance. By dawn, only charred ruins remained where the barn had stood. Daniel carried an exhausted Micah back to bed, then joined Emily at the cabin table. She sat with her hands clasped tightly, staring into nothing. "I have to leave," she whispered. "No." Daniel's voice was rough from smoke. "This wasn't your doing. We both know it was." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "They'll keep coming, Daniel. Next time could be worse. I won't risk Micah's life. We can rebuild. They burned your barn to send a message." She cut him off. "What will they burn next?" "The cabin?" With us inside? She shook her head firmly. I won't have that on my conscience. Daniel wanted to argue, to tell her they would face this together, but the words stuck in his throat. The image of Micah choking on smoke haunted him. What kind of father risked his son's life for pride? Emily rose quietly and began gathering her few belongings. Each item she tucked into her worn carpet bag felt heavy with regret. The borrowed shawl, carefully folded. The wooden cross Micah had carved. A small tin of sewing needles Daniel had bought her in town. The night crept past in silence, broken only by this occasional pop of cooling embers from the barn ruins. Neither of them slept. Emily packed methodically, while Daniel sat in his chair by the dying fire, unable to watch but unable to leave. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the grief below. The scent of smoke hung in the air like an accusation, a reminder of how quickly dreams could turn to ash. Gray dawn light crept through the cabin windows, painting pale squares on the rough wooden floor. Daniel stirred from his chair by the cold hearth, his neck stiff from the awkward position. For a moment, he couldn't remember why he'd slept there instead of his bed. Then the acrid smell of burned wood hit his nose, and yesterday's horror came rushing back. The barn. The fire. Emily. He jerked fully awake, his heart dropping as he saw Emily standing by the door. She wore her thin coat and clutched her carpet bag, ready to slip away into the breaking day. A dusting of fresh snow had fallen overnight, visible through the window behind her. You're leaving now? His voice came out hoarse, scratchy from smoke and lack of sleep. Emily nodded, her face pale but determined. Better to go before Micah wakes. It'll be easier. But a small sound from the corner proved her wrong. Micah pushed himself up in bed, his eyes widening as he took in Emily's traveling clothes and bag. No. The boy's cry tore through the quiet cabin. You can't go. Emily's composure cracked. She set down her bag and went to Micah's bedside, kneeling to face him. I have to, sweetheart, to keep you safe, but we need you here. Tears streamed down Micah's cheeks as he reached for her with trembling hands. Please don't leave us. Daniel watched, his throat tight, as Emily gathered Micah into her arms. The boy buried his face in her shoulder, his small body shaking with sobs. Emily stroked his hair, her own tears falling silently. Your pa will take good care of you, she whispered. He always has. It ain't the same without you, Micah hiccuped. You make him smile again. Daniel's chest ached at his son's words. When had Micah become so wise to his father's heart? Emily pressed a gentle kiss to Micah's forehead, then carefully unwound his clinging arms. I have to go now, before more trouble comes. She stood quickly, as if afraid her resolve would break if she stayed longer. Grabbing her bag, she pulled open the cabin door. Cold air rushed in, along with morning light that caught the tears on her cheeks. Emily. Daniel stepped forward, but stopped, torn between his fear for their safety and the growing hollow in his chest at the thought of her leaving. She paused in the doorway, not turning back. Thank you for your kindness, Daniel Boone. I won't forget it. Then she was gone, her figure growing smaller as she trudged through the fresh snow. Daniel stood rooted, watching her walk away while fury at Latham and his thugs warred with the urge to run after her. Micah's continued sobs broke through his paralysis. Daniel went to his son, gathering the boy into his arms like he hadn't done since Micah was small. She's really gone. Pa, Micah choked out. I know, son. Daniel's voice was rough with emotion. I know. The day crawled past in a fog of grief. Daniel tried to salvage what he could from the barn ruins, while Micah sat quietly in his wheelchair by the window, watching the path where Emily had disappeared. As evening approached, Daniel built up the fire and heated a simple supper of beans. Neither of them had much appetite. The cabin felt emptier than it had even after his wife's passing, as if Emily's brief presence had awakened them to what a real home should feel like. making her absence that much sharper. After the dishes were cleared, Micah wheeled himself to Daniel's chair. "Pa, can we pray together? Pa, can we pray together?" Daniel stared at his son, startled. They hadn't prayed as a family since losing Sarah. The habit had died with her, along with so much else. "Please?" Micah held out his small hands expectantly. Something cracked in Daniel's chest. He knelt beside Micah's chair and took his son's offered hands. They were quiet for a moment, the fire crackling softly behind them. "Dear God," Micah began, his voice trembling but clear, "please watch over Miss Emily wherever she's gone. And please help Pa see that you send her special for both of us." Daniel's eyes burned with unexpected tears. He'd been so focused on protecting them from harm, he'd forgotten to protect them from loneliness. "Pa." Micah squeezed his hands. "God sent her for both of us, didn't he? To make us a family again?" Daniel looked into his son's earnest face and felt the last of his hardened heart break open. All these months, he thought he was managing fine on his own, keeping his grief locked away. But Emily had shown him what they'd been missing: warmth, laughter, the simple joy of sharing meals together. She hadn't just helped Micah find his smile again. She'd helped Daniel remember how to live instead of just survive. He pulled Micah into a fierce hug, his voice rough with emotion. "You're right, son. The good Lord did send her to us, and I've been too stubborn to see it." Dawn crept over the mountain peaks, painting the snow-laden branches in shades of rose and gold. Daniel stood at his bedroom window, his jaw set with determination. The events of yesterday, Emily's departure into the bitter cold, haunted his restless dreams all night. Micah's words echoed in his mind. God sent her for both of us. He pulled on his heavy wool coat and strode to the barn's remains. Among the charred timbers, he found his saddle mostly intact. His horse nickered softly from the makeshift shelter he'd fashioned against the cabin wall. Daniel worked quickly, checking the cinch twice before leading the horse to the front door. Inside, Micah sat wrapped in quilts, his wooden cross clutched tight. "You're going after her, ain't you, Pa?" "That I am, son." Daniel knelt beside the wheelchair. "Mrs. Jensen next door will look after you till we return." Micah's eyes shone with hope. "You promise you'll bring her home?" Daniel squeezed his son's shoulder. "I aim to try my best." The morning air bit sharp as Daniel helped settle Micah at the neighbors. Mrs. Jensen, a kind-faced woman who'd helped after his wife's passing, nodded, understanding. "Don't you fret none about the boy. Just find that poor woman before she freezes." Daniel mounted up, scanning the ground. Emily's tracks showed clear in the fresh snow, leading toward the river trail. His horse's hooves crunched through the crusty surface as he urged it forward. The wind whipped at his face, and he pulled his scarf higher. Hours passed as Daniel followed Emily's meandering path. Sometimes her tracks wandered dangerously close to the river's edge, speaking of exhaustion. His worry grew with each mile. The winter sun climbed higher, but offered little warmth through the clouds. Near midday, he spotted a dark figure ahead, struggling through knee-deep drifts. Emily's borrowed shawl fluttered in the wind as she stumbled forward. Daniel's heart clenched at the sight of her, so small against the vast white landscape. "Emily!" he called out, spurring his horse faster. She turned, her face pale and drawn. Frost rimmed her bonnet, and her skirts were soaked through. "Daniel?" Her voice came weak and confused. "You shouldn't have come." He dismounted, leading his horse closer. "I shouldn't have let you leave. The barn. Your home. It's all my fault." Her words hitched with suppressed sobs. "No." Daniel reached for her cold hands. "Those men, they're the ones at fault. And I won't let them drive away what matters most." Emily swayed on her feet. "But Micah needs you." "We both do." Daniel's voice grew gentle. "You've brought light back to our home, Emily. Light I thought was gone forever." Tears froze on her cheeks. "I only wanted to keep you safe. Sometimes safe ain't what's right." Daniel removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Come home with me. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Emily's resistance crumbled as exhaustion overtook her. Daniel lifted her onto his horse, mounting behind her. She leaned back against his chest, shivering despite the coat. He wrapped one arm secure around her waist, keeping the reins in his other hand. The journey home took longer, the horse carefully picking its way through deepening snow. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring about water rights and burning barns. Daniel held her closer, silently praying for strength. Night was falling when they finally reached the cabin. Lamplight glowed from the windows. Mrs. Jensen had brought Micah home and started a fire. Daniel helped Emily down, supporting her as they walked inside. "Emily!" Micah's face lit up like sunshine breaking through clouds. He wheeled forward as Daniel settled Emily in the chair nearest the hearth. Mrs. Jensen quietly took her leave, pressing a pot of hot soup into Daniel's hands before she went. Emily sat trembling, thawing slowly by the fire's warmth. Daniel served the soup while Micah clutched Emily's hand, refusing to let go. After some food and warmth returned color to her cheeks, Emily began weeping softly. I thought leaving was the only way." Daniel knelt beside her chair. "Listen here. Those men meant to frighten us apart, but they don't know what they're dealing with. Your husband's claim is rightful, and we aim to prove it. I promise you, Emily, whatever storms come, you won't weather them alone." She looked up at him through tear-filled eyes, seeing the strength and certainty in his gaze. Something shifted between them in that moment, like ice breaking in spring floods. A tender shoot of hope, pushing through frozen ground. Morning frost glazed the courthouse windows as Daniel and Emily climbed the worn wooden steps. The county seat bustled with activity, horses and wagons crowding the muddy street outside. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the leather folder containing her husband's papers. Daniel walked close beside her, his presence steady as a mountain. Inside the high-ceilinged courtroom, wooden benches creaked with the weight of curious townsfolk. Mr. Latham sat near the front, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his face a mask of calm confidence. The judge, a weathered man with silver hair, called the hearing to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. Mr. Abernathy approached the bench first, his steps slow but purposeful. Though his body showed age, his voice rang clear as he described surveying the land years ago. He pointed to original maps, explaining watershed boundaries and property markers with precise detail. "I marked those stakes myself," he testified, meeting the judge's gaze. "And I recorded every measurement in my logbook here." Latham's lawyer rose to question him, trying to cast doubt on his memory. But Abernathy remained steady, each answer revealing deeper knowledge of the territory. When he finished, Emily saw several townspeople nodding thoughtfully. Then Latham presented his evidence, deeds, and letters. That seemed to challenge Emily's claim. But as the judge examined them closely, inconsistencies emerged. Dates didn't align with county records. Signatures appeared oddly uniform. The judge's frown deepened as he compared documents. Emily's heart pounded as she took her turn to speak. She smoothed her plain dress and stood straight, though her voice quavered at first. "My James knew he was dying," she began softly. "The fever took him quick, but his mind stayed clear till the end." The courtroom grew still as Emily described that final night. "He made me promise to protect the water rights," she continued, stronger now. "Said they weren't just for us, but for all the small farmers upstream who'd suffer if the railroad dammed the flow." Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. "I mean to honor that promise, Your Honor." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Daniel watched Emily with quiet pride, seeing not the poor widow others dismissed, but a woman of remarkable courage. Then came the surprise that shifted the room's mood entirely. Preacher Ward stood up from his bench, requesting to speak. The judge nodded permission. and the preacher cleared his throat. "I confess I misjudged this situation grievously," Ward began, his usual stern manner softened by evident shame. "When Mrs. Hollis first came to our town, I let fear of scandal cloud my Christian duty." He turned to face the gathered townspeople. "But I have witnessed her character these past weeks, her gentle care for the boom boy, her quiet dignity despite cruel treatment. And now, hearing the truth about her husband's dying wish." He paused, squaring his shoulders. "I cannot remain silent while injustice threatens one of God's children." His words carried weight with the townsfolk who had previously shunned Emily. Several women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Even some of Latham's strongest supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The judge listened to final arguments, his expression thoughtful. When Latham tried one last time to discredit Emily's claim, the judge held up his hand. "I've heard enough," he declared. "The evidence clearly shows Mrs. Hollis holds valid title to the water rights in question." He turned a stern gaze on Latham. "Furthermore, I am referring these suspicious documents to the district attorney for investigation." Latham's face reddened as he realized his scheme had crumbled. He gathered his papers quickly and strode from the courtroom, leaving his lawyer to stumble after him. Relief washed over Emily in a powerful wave. Her legs weakened, but Daniel was there, taking her hand firmly in his. She gripped back without hesitation, no longer caring who saw. Around them, townspeople pressed close to offer congratulations and apologies. Mr. Vivinathy beamed like a proud grandfather. "Justice may move slow," he said, patting Emily's shoulder, "but she generally finds her way in the end." The preacher approached next, his expression humble. "I hope you can forgive my earlier harshness, Mrs. Hollis. Your strength of character has taught me a valuable lesson about true Christian charity." Emily managed a gracious smile, though tears of relief still threatened. "Thank you for speaking up today, preacher. It meant more than you know." As they prepared to leave the courthouse, Daniel kept hold of Emily's hand. Outside, winter sunshine broke through the clouds, glinting off fresh snow on the distant peaks. Emily paused on the steps, breathing deeply of the crisp air. For the first time since James's death, she felt truly free of shadows. "Ready to head home?" Daniel asked softly. Emily squeezed his hand, knowing he meant more than just a journey back to the cabin. "Yes," she whispered. "I believe I am." The ride home from the courthouse felt different. Neighbors who had once turned away now lifted their hats in greeting. Old Tom Jenkins, who'd whispered the harshest words about Emily, shuffled up to their wagon with hat in hand. "Been thinking on things," he muttered. "Reckon we was wrong about you, Miss Hollis. My Martha wondered if you might share your bread recipe sometime." Emily's smile was gentle. "I'd be happy to." At the homestead, the burned barn's charred beams stood like black fingers against the sky. But Daniel had already begun gathering fresh timber, and now others pitched in to help. Emily worked alongside them, her skirts tied up practical-like, hauling boards and passing tools. From his spot in the shade, Micah called encouragement, his clear voice carrying across the yard. "That's it, Miss Emily. Pa, look how strong she is." The work was hard, but healing. Each nail driven felt like mending more than just the barn. When evening fell, they gathered around the table, hands joined in prayer. Emily's cornbread and stew filled their bellies, while stories and laughter filled their hearts. The cabin glowed with warmth against the mountain-eyed dot in quiet moments. Daniel worked on a special project. His knife moved steady and sure across seasoned oak, shaping a new wheelchair for Micah. Emily watched his careful crafting, noting how he tested each joint and smoothed each edge with patience born of love. One evening, as lamplight cast soft shadows on the cabin walls, Daniel set aside his carving. Micah was already dozing in his old chair, wooden cross clutched in his small hand. Emily stood at the wash basin, humming softly as she cleaned the supper dishes. "Emily, Daniel's voice was low but clear. She turned, drying her hands on her apron. "I've been thinking," he continued, moving closer. "This cabin, it ain't much, but it's home. And you've made it more of a home these past weeks than it's been since." He swallowed hard. "What I'm trying to say is, I don't want you staying on as a guest no more. I want you to stay as family. For good." Emily's hands trembled as tears spilled down her cheeks. The dish towel dropped forgotten to the floor. Micah stirred at their voices, blinking awake. Seeing Emily's tears, he pushed himself straighter. "Are you staying forever, Miss Emily? Please say yes." "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with joy. "Yes, I'll stay." Micah's delighted clapping filled the cabin as Daniel reached for Emily's hand. The February snow lay thick across the valley, but wisps of smoke rose cheerfully from both the cabin and the newly rebuilt barn. Inside, warmth and contentment filled every corner. The fresh-cut timber still carried its sweet pine scent, mixing with the aroma of Emily's baking bread. Emily sat in the old rocking chair by the hearth, her worn Bible open in her lap. Micah wheeled closer in his new oak wheelchair, its smooth joints allowing him easy movement across the plank floor. He held the wooden cross he'd carved, running his fingers over its familiar shape as Emily's clear voice brought the scriptures to life. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord," she read, her voice gentle. "Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." At the table, Daniel's knife moved steadily across a piece of pine, shaping what would become a gift for Emily, a proper hope chest. He glanced up often, watching his son lean forward eagerly as Emily read, seeing the peace that had settled over them all like a warm blanket. A knock at the door announced Preacher Ward. This time, his smile reached his eyes as he stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. "Brother Daniel, Sister Emily," he greeted them warmly. "I thought to share fellowship this evening." As dusk painted the sky purple beyond the windows, they gathered around the table, heads bowed and hands clasped. The lamp's golden light caught the tears in Daniel's eyes as he offered thanks. Here was his miracle, not in grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but in a poor woman's kindness to his son, in daily bread shared with love, in a family knit together by grace. What had begun with Emily feeding his hungry child had become God's way of feeding all their souls. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.